Okay, it has it's past 10 o'clock just by 1 minute, so I would like to welcome you all to this session with our honorary professor in Techno-Anthropology from the University of Twente, Peter Paul Verbeek. And this is well, a tradition now, so we are I would say we are family now, and we have also an agreement of collaboration between Techno-Anthropology and the sister or twin program you have in Twente on the philosophy of science, technology, and society. So it's of course possible for you on our third semester of the master's program to apply for studying a semester at Twente. And this semester there are actually 2 students. We have that. This is a possibility for 2 students. So we have 2 students now in Twente, even though the circumstances are difficult due to this COVID. But still they went. Every semester, actually, to those of you who don't know it, Peter Paul, he visits us this semester, and the previous semester it was not possible for a physical meeting, so we do it digitally. But this has the advantage that we can gather quite many people, and I can see already we are 58 present here. Of course, you all know that Peter Paul is a world-leading expert in post-phenomenology. So we are extremely happy that you allocate your attention, part of your attention, to us. We are very honored, and post-phenomenology is also the central, or at least one of the central approaches to that we use here at Techno-Anthropology. So that's of course a great honor, and really behalf of both the faculty members and all the students here, we are very happy that you prioritize us. So thank you very much for that. Each semester you give a lecture, and we also have a possibility for discussion. And this is also the program for today. First, you will speak for around an hour. Then we will have some questions related to your presentation. We take a short break, and then we have a presentation by a student group. That is Mattia, Renata, Benedicte. Let me just check. Are you here?
Can you hear us?
Yes, good. Okay, you are here.
Yes, you're here.
Thank you very much. So you will present your project after the break, and you have sent me slides. So if it doesn't work from your computer to share it, then I can share it from mine. But I will, yeah. And then. So that we will take maybe for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a discussion of that. And then Sissel and your group, Anna, you also, and others, Anna and Sissel, who are in your group, can you just say it?
We are Morten and Simon also.
Okay. So you will, yeah. So you have some questions regarding how you can use the post-phenomenological lens to address, do a use in a project on technologies that are not here at the moment, or that needs to be designed. So how the link between post-phenomenology and design, ethical design, that might be, yeah. So you have some questions regarding that. So we take that that afterwards. Yes. Are there anyone else who have prepared a presentation or have specific questions in mind? Then you can write it in the chat, or you can just raise your hand now. Okay. Please then mute your microphones, and I think also for the sake of the quality of the technical quality, I would say, of the lecture, you how you receive it, then you should turn off your video when Peter Paul is speaking, because I know you have some slides to share with us, and you will share your screen, so we will not be able to see each other during the presentation. But if you have questions after the presentation, and we hope so, so please take notes during the lecture. Then we ask you to turn on your camera so that everyone can see you when you speak. And I think that improves also the dialogue. Then I should say that that we are recording this session. I think some of this introduction might not be needed in the final presentation, but at least the lecture we will use also for teaching purposes. And I know many of you have seen some videos, the inaugural lecture when Peter Paul, his first presentation here at Techno-Anthropology, we have recorded that, and we are we are using that, and we will also use this in teaching. So I think oh, there is no. I just got we have sound, yes, okay. So there's someone who can't hear, but that's not all of you. That's only one who has a problem. Okay, so sorry. So without further ado, then I give the the stage. I don't know if you can say the floor, but the screen, the digital stage to you. Yeah, good. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. So let's see if you can see the presentation well. It's always the question, do you see it full screen or my editing screen?
Full screen.
You see the full screen, good. That is what I hoped. So thank you, Tom, for this very nice introduction. Nice to be here or there again. A pity that again I cannot travel to Aalborg, Copenhagen. It's one of my favorite trips all the time, but I am sure that we can still have some intellectual fun in this way. So happy to be here again. Before I start, maybe what I also wanted to share with you is I know that this approach that we discussed today is not the only approach in the program. Ethnographic theory is another big approach. And coincidentally, this week, Latour won the Spinoza Lens. That's a prize, a Dutch prize in philosophy for international thinkers who are very influential also in society. So we had a very nice event with Latour, and he also gave a digital lecture in Nijmegen. And I will share a link to the video that you can find there, because it was really super. It was super interesting. Latour is very ill, by the way, but he still, gathered all his energy, I think, to give a very interesting talk on Gaia, the climate, the Earth, where he links a lot of elements in his work together. So I just wanted to say that to you. It might also be really nice for the collection of videos for the program. But now let's move to what I want to do today. So every time I try to add some new element to the core, which I always also try to teach. And the core, of course, is post-phenomenology, human-technology relations. So for the new students, I always try to give some kind of an introduction to the basics of post-phenomenology in this lecture in fall. So I will do that again. I hope it's not too redundant for students who have already heard me, but I will try to do it fast. Then I will move to the guidance ethics approach that we have developed past year with a think tank here in the Netherlands, ECP, Platform for the Information Society, as they call themselves. I also placed a link in the chat, but I'm not sure if people who logged in after that can still access that, but I will place a link again. It's just a free downloadable PDF. It's a very applied book, so it's not super intellectual, but it's actually a way to take human technology interactions into ethics and to enable people in society, citizens as well, to do ethical reflection. And that's also what I want to reflect on in the third part of my talk, how that guidance ethics approach can also be seen as a form of citizen ethics. And I think that that really fits quite well the ideas of techno-anthropology, where of course it's all about human technology relations and also empowering society, empowering stakeholders, people in society to deal in a responsible way with technology. But of course, it's all built on the basis of understanding the relations between humans and technologies and the post-phenomenological approach that is there. So let me just first give you a few words on that again as a start. So the basic idea of post-phenomenology is that we need to understand more deeply how this interaction between humans and technologies takes shape. We are different. At the same time, technologies play a very deep constitutive role in our society. So how to understand that interaction, how to understand how humans and technologies come together. So one of the key thinkers in this field is Don Eide. Don Eide, who founded post-phenomenology, you can say, and maybe one of his most important books is then Technology in the Live World, a book I'm sure you have, and if you don't, you should buy it. I think this is really a very important source to understand this new direction that the philosophy of technology took through his work, and his work is really still, I think, very inspirational to many people in the field. Now, the core intuition actually of Don Eide is that we need to expand phenomenology into post-phenomenology. And that intuition actually tries to do something that you can depict quite easily. And so in phenomenology, it was all about understanding human-world relations with a very deep intuition that those relations can only be understood really in terms of the very deep connection between the two. Humans are always related to the world. We cannot do otherwise. We always see something, we hear something. We are always directed at the world around us. And that world in itself will probably exist, but it doesn't make much sense to ask a question about the world in itself, the things in themselves, because they're only there for us when they are there for us, when we have a relation with them. So the relations between humans and the world, that is a very central element in phenomenology. Trying to understand the nature of the relation is even, I think, a lens through which you can understand the history of phenomenology. And that line between human and world, or arrow, sometimes has been understood as perception or as consciousness or being in the world or whatever. Now, many ways in which humans and the world are connected. Well, if you look at technology from this scheme, the obvious thing you could do would be to say, okay, humans are the subjects on the one hand, technology is an object that's in the part of the world. So then it's about human technology relations and how are humans interacting with the material objects of technology. And I think the core intuition that Don Eide tries to further in his thinking is that is not the right way to see it. We should not see technology as part of the world, but we should see technology as part of the relations we have with the world. And that's a totally different intuition. I think this partly builds on Heidegger's idea of how people use tools. And when we use a tool, we typically do not interact with the tool itself, but the tool withdraws somehow to the background. And then we experience the world through the tool. For some reason, all those old philosophers speak about hammers. That's also what Heidegger did. The shoemaker with a hammer. If you're hammering, you don't experience your hammer, but your attention is with the nail. So the hammer is, as it were, a part of the relation you have with the world around you. Well, that is quite a deep intuition, because as soon as you understand technology in this constitutive way as helping to shape human world relations, it also means that it helps to shape how we are there in relation to the world and how the world is there in relation to us. So technologies become, well, constitutional for what it means to be human and what the world is for us. And with that, Don tried to make the difference, in a sense, in the philosophy of technology, thinking against Heidegger and people from the phenomenological yeah, you could say tradition, who also thought about technology, with Heidegger, of course, being the most influential thinker in the past. So Heidegger had a very gloomy, negative appreciation of technology. And Heidegger actually, even though he was one of the sources of the idea of technologies or objects somehow withdrawing from our attention and becoming part of our relations with the world, in his later work on technology, he actually didn't see technology as material objects, but more as an approach to the world, as a way of thinking. In his complicated work, which is, by the way, also highly inspiring, and also still for myself, even though I think there are some new interpretations that you need to give to his work. But for Heidegger, it's even about the history of being, of what it means to be. And for Heidegger, technology is a very fundamental way of interpreting the world where everything becomes raw material, ready for human manipulation. And so if he would think about tools, in the examples that he gives, he always reduces the tools to the way of thinking behind it. And so that's what you could call backward thinking, thinking backward, thinking in terms of the conditions for technology, and the conditions lay in our interpretations of the world. And well, that's how he then understands any technology basically as the expression of this manipulative attitude in which things cannot have an intrinsic value, in which there cannot be any form of transcendence, whatever. Everything is reduced to the human will to power. Well, the human technology world scheme that we just saw as the basis of post-phenomenology has a completely different appreciation, because then actually technologies are not some kind of an alienating force of an authentic way of being human or an authentic richness of the world, but they actually help to shape how the world can be there for us. So that's a forward-thinking way, you could say. Technologies are at the core of how human world relations take shape, and they reveal the world for us in new ways. And that's, of course, also what typically happens when we interact with the technology. They help us to get in touch with the world around us, and they help us also to interpret the world, to have a meaningful experience of the world. Now, Heidi made a distinction between all kinds of human technology world relations. So you must have seen that one, if you have ever heard something about Don Heidi. And so I will not go into all the details, but the whole idea is that well, in many ways, technologies can be part of the human world relation. Sometimes really close to ourselves when we embody a technology. Glasses that you embody, and you don't look at them, but through them. Or sometimes they're a bit further away. They give a representation of the world that we read, a thermometer, for instance, and that gives us a number, not a sensation. And then we understand how warm it is outside. Or we interact with the technology in the alterity relation, or they become a context for our experience, and they're even further away. In very many ways, technologies can be part of human world relations. And well, that is a central element in his thinking. This is, as it were, the infrastructure of how technologies connect us to the world. And then to understand that interaction also means, for myself actually, when I tried to build further on Heidi's work, that you should see this really as some kind of mutual constitution. I think for myself, this is maybe the most fundamental insights from post-phenomenology, where you say that you should not see technology as some kind of a filter that you place between humans and the world. But actually, technology organizes a relation from which a specific way of being human and a specific interpretation of the world emerges. That's really different. So I've done a lot of work a long time ago on ultrasound, and I still like the example because it shows it so well. Of course, you can see an ultrasound image when you're expecting a child as some kind of a peek into the womb, and then you already have a picture of the baby. Of course, that is what it is for most people. A print of the first scan ends up in the photo album, in the baby album. But and of course, there is a pregnant woman and a fetus and a scanner between. But what in fact happens is that making a scan reconfigures what it means to expect a child and what the fetus means for us. And because suddenly the fetus becomes a potential patient. You can already see if something might be wrong before the child is born, which makes you responsible for the health condition of your child already before birth, which also burdens you with the responsibility to think about an abortion. I mean, you now have to think about the question, do you want this child to suffer in this way? Because it becomes your decision now that the child has to suffer. So you change also into a decision maker about the life of your child. So mediation is constitutive. It constitutes humans and it constitutes the world. And it does so with this infrastructure of human technology world relations, which always has two dimensions. It helps to shape how humans are in their world, how we behave, how we act, or at a societal level, how we engage in all kinds of social ways of doing things, practices of education, healthcare, etc. And the other way around, technologies organize how the world is there for us, how we perceive the world, how we interpret the world, how social and cultural frameworks of interpretation take shape. That's how technologies play this constitutive role. So post-phenomenology here is a way to understand how technologies change what it means to be human and change what the world means for us. Not only in a negative and alienating way, not reducing technology to the technological way of thinking behind the artifacts, but really starting from the artifacts, from the system, from the machines, from the devices that we have in our world. An interesting thing is also that it really connects to philosophical anthropology. So this is a picture that I also showed in my inaugural lecture, because the interesting thing of philosophical anthropology is that it has in fact always paid a lot of attention to technology as an element of what it means to be human. And the funny thing is, if you look back in history, if we try to understand how human beings before us lived, when there are no written sources, we try to understand how they lived by digging up the tools that they used. So this hand axe tells us something about the kind of humans that they were and the ways in which they lived their lives. And so in that sense, the cell phone is not so different. It also reveals the world for us, and it constitutes us as specific kinds of human beings. Well, the interesting thing for now, and that will also be the bridge to what I want to say about guidance ethics and also a bit about the COVID-19 apps that I also spoke a little bit about last time that I was online in Copenhagen and Aalborg, but I have more to say now, I think. But the new technology that we have now in our time are really different from the technologies that we used to have. And that's also why I think we need to expand post-phenomenology a bit into, we need to develop new ideas of human technology world relations. And so a lot of the technologies that Don Eide evaluated and understood still fit in the configuration of using a technology, which is still a bit classical, you could say. There's a human user and a technical object. It's about the interaction between the two. Here, David Bowie behind the first Macintosh. If we want to expand that, then we need to develop also new understandings of human technology world relations. And new technologies urge us to do so. The Internet of Things results in smart cities, smart homes, smart hospitals, smart houses, where we are rather immersed in technologies. They perceive us, they work on us from the background. And technologies do not only merge with the environment, but also with ourselves. Deep brain stimulation, working on the functioning of the brain through technologies, which is also not a technology that you use. It's rather some kind of a fusion you have with the technology. We can go on with this and expand the list, and we can keep expanding the list. HoloLens or Google Glass, an augmentation. You see the world through glass, and you have this extra layer of information about the world. So you get interpretational frameworks delivered with your technology, as it were, which gives you a bifurcated relation to the world. Or interaction with the robot, but it's a true interaction. The robot also perceives you, works on you, shows emotions, or reads emotions. Or cooperation with artificial intelligence, where the AI system and the human being, for instance, a medical doctor and a medical AI system, they both have a relation to the world. The doctor perceives the patient, the system tries to understand the patient, and the system also needs to understand how the doctor could understand the patient or the system, and the other way around. And so this results in some kind of a triangular interaction between humans and the world. We can go on like this forever. It gives a lot of new configurations, and I will not go into the details of all the arrows and the brackets, etc. But with the formula of an idea of the human technology world formula, you can really toy and try to understand how humans in the world get connected in new ways, how we develop new intentional relations, intentional ways of being directed at the world around us, which is an interesting thing to do, because it also helps you to see that infrastructure, that dynamics of how technologies change how we are in the world. So it's an interesting thing to do, I think, an important thing to do. Now, over the past years, we have been working a lot on developing this whole idea further into a theory of what we call technological mediation, where technologies indeed are mainly seen as mediators between humans and the world, mediators of human-world relations. So this basically builds on ID's idea. We've been trying to expand that idea and to also understand how it contributes to, well, various subfields in philosophy. So for instance, epistemology. How do scientific instruments organize how scientists understand the world? Or in existential questions, like decisions about abortion or about life and death. So how do technologies for euthanasia or for antenatal diagnostics reconfigure how we are vulnerable and how we understand death and our own finitude? But also in ethics, we've done a lot of work trying to understand how technologies change the moral relations between humans and their environment. Moral engagement of a drone pilot with a victim. Well, of course, also the moral engagement of parents who have to make a decision about the life of their child when they have an ultrasound scan made. But also how value frameworks get reorganized. And we've been studying, for instance, how Google Glass has resulted actually in implicitly different conceptions of privacy when people were discussing their worries on Google Glass. And we've analyzed YouTube videos, as well, the comments that people place with YouTube videos of people who were using Google Glass. And you instantly see that how they speak about privacy changes when they speak about glass. And I think that's maybe the ultimate consequence of that idea of mediation, that technologies become really fundamental. And so if it's then about ethics, and I think there's of course a lot of normative discussions about technology, maybe not only ethical, sometimes also political, but it's really important to see that technologies also affect the value frameworks from which we evaluate these very technologies. And so ethics and technologies are not independent from each other, and that makes the ethics of technology super interesting, super complicated also. So this lemniscate model developed by Olya Kudina, one of the PhD students who worked in the research that we did on mediation, who's now working at Delft University of Technology in the philosophy team there. Olya developed this idea of the lemniscate to give some extra depth to that human technology world scheme, to ID's formula, you could say, where there is a continuous flux, and where what we try to do also in the project is to add an extra element to the idea of mediation, and that element is appropriation. If you only think about technologies mediating human world relations, then if you over exaggerate that, then you end up in, well, maybe a mild form of determinism, where technologies really determine how we are in the world. But if you do so, you forget that humans always also have to interpret the technology, have to make sense of the technology in order for the technology to be able to connect us to the world. And that's what this lemniscate tries to express. Humans interpret the technology, and then the technology discloses the world for us. And in that new understanding of the world, technology gets a specific new meaning, reconstituting what it means to be human in that world. And from that new idea of being human, we then use the technology, etc. So it's a continuous flux. And so again, for the ultrasound example, you can say that. So you use the technology to see your unborn child, but suddenly the child changes into a potential patient. Suddenly the technology then changes into a potential instrument in an abortion practice. Humans change into human beings who might need to make a decision about the lives of their unborn child. So expecting a child changes. And so this is how you can enter that flux. Now that's a bridge for me to the second element of my talk. So all what I said so far are stuff that you might already have heard before, and now just hear me say it again in new words, or you have read it, I don't know. But this is the infrastructure. This is, I think, the core, for me at least, of how you can understand technology, and also how you can deal with ethical, societal, and political questions regarding technology. And of course, there are other approaches too. Actor network theory is a very important one for myself as well. It's just slightly different. So we could also discuss the differences between the approaches, which is also super interesting to do. I think this specific focus on interpretation, hermeneutics, techno-hermeneutics, you could say, that's maybe what really stands out in this post-phenomenological approach. The dynamics of us understanding the world, and, well, the mutual constitution of humans and world. Well, this also has a lot to do with ethics. because ethics really takes on a different shape as soon as you take that idea of mediation seriously. And also means that we need to move towards a different idea of what ethics can be in relation to technology. So I like to call that guidance ethics. And so we also made a very practical guide for guidance ethics. And I will place the link again in the chat after this talk. And you can just download it. It's a very short book. It's really intended to help people do ethical reflection in practices. But let me tell you a little bit about the theories behind it that are not in that book, that are also not needed to do it, but that could be interested from an intellectual perspective to see how it is based on that post-phenomenological approach. Now, maybe what I always like to express is that if you take mediation seriously, then of course ethics changes. And so there are at least 3 levels at which technologies can be ethically significant, you could say. First of all, of course, technologies mediate. They have an impact, if you want to use a more everyday word. And of course, impact is a complicated word from the perspective of science and technology studies and from post-phenomenology. But for the sake of the argument, technologies have implications. And we could evaluate, well, the ethical quality, the moral quality of the implications. Why could we or could we not be in favor of these impacts? But that's ethics as usual, you could say. Now, one level deeper is us as moral agents, as moral agents who are in a technologically mediated way connected to their world. How does technology change how we are moral agents? How we see our unborn child? How we conceptualize our responsibilities towards the fetus? How a drone pilot has a moral relation with a potential victim. And so moral relations, moral agency, moral choices and decisions, moral actions are mediated by technologies through that infrastructure of human technology world relations, and therefore moral agency itself is affected. That is quite a fundamental consequence. Also a consequence which has raised a lot of discussion within the ethics of technology. Many people have also been very irritated with us saying that there is this normative significance of technology itself. We can also talk about that more extensively. You can also find some nice discussions about this online, about the moral significance of technological artifacts and the problems that people can have with attributing moral agency to artifacts, which we do not do, by the way, but that's a different discussion. But moral agency of humans is mediated by technology. And then maybe the deepest consequence that I explained just a few minutes ago is how also our value frameworks are mediated. How the meaning of privacy changes when technologies affect the private sphere in a new way. So when ethics is not independent from technology, the old model of ethics as some kind of an assessment institute, as you still see, for instance, many times in hospitals where there are these ethical assessment committees that need to give permission to do something. And that whole idea doesn't really fit anymore. Of course, I don't mean to say that we should accept any technology, that we should not try to say no to some technologies. But the idea there is some kind of external court that can give an assessment from outside. It doesn't work. What we should rather do is to step into the system, to accept that we also make our decisions in a technologically mediated way. You can only do ethics from within, as it were. And that's really the lesson that I learned from Foucault. I also explained that, I think, in my inaugural lecture that you might have seen already, where the whole idea is that there is no place to step out of the network of relations and to view it from some kind of a God's perspective. You're always in it. And the only thing you can do, Foucault says, in the situation is to see that you can develop a limit attitude, as he says. Limit attitude, interesting concept, saying that if you cannot step out of the system, you can try to stand at its limits and to try to understand how you came to think the way you think, how things came to be the way they are. So it's trying to unravel where you are, how you think, without giving up the idea that the way in which you understand it is also mediated by technologies if you connect this to technology. So if you take that seriously, then ethics should rather be an accompaniment rather than an assessment. And that's also the basis for that guidance ethics approach. a very practical tool that you can use academically, but also practically. So I will end my talk with explaining how we use this actually with a panel of citizens to evaluate the Corona app, the COVID app that we have in the Netherlands. You have it also in Denmark, I think, a slightly different one, and that uses the Bluetooth chip in mobile phones to detect the distance between two phones, and that gives you a signal if you have been longer than 15 minutes closer than 1.5 meters to somebody who later appears to be infected with the virus. Very ethically sensitive technology for which we try to also get the citizen perspective and the professional perspective. I will end with that. Let me first explain a little bit about this guidance ethics approach. It's really practical. So the whole idea, and maybe I can already go to that slide because that might, I will show it to you now. I have to scroll further without you being able to see that. There are maybe 3 elements of this guidance ethics approach, and here you already see a picture of the Dutch app. I think if you use the guidance ethics approach, first of all, it is an ethics from within, not from outside. It's an ethics that tries to stand next to the technology. It doesn't have some kind of a set of rules that it uses as an external source to evaluate the technology, but it tries to understand how technologies might even affect those values. The second thing is that it is really a bottom-up approach, not only a top-down approach. So it's not only a matter of ethical experts who can give that evaluation. Actually, people who have to work with the technology, people who experience the implications of technology might be better sources, or at least as good to understand what's at stake. And of course, that doesn't mean that we don't need ethicists. We do need them a lot. Because ethicists, of course, have a specific expertise. So I don't want to do away with the idea of expertise, but I do want to do away with the idea that well, there is a monopoly on ethical reflections from the experts. Maybe a third line is also that this is what you could call positive ethics and not negative ethics. And again, that does not mean that we should never say no to a technology, that we are always positive. That's not at all the intention. But the idea is negative ethics actually tries to focus on setting the boundaries for something, the boundaries for what we do not want. And positive ethics tries to shape the conditions for what we do want. And like positive psychology, where people say, well, we have been focusing so much on malfunctioning, as it were, on all the negative aspects of how humans could function. Let's do positive psychology. Let's focus on flourishing, on well-being, and try to understand that. Well, this is maybe what we try to do for ethics as well. And then you do this in 3 steps. So first, you really try to study the technology very concretely. Well, this is really what techno-anthropologists can do, right? Understand the technology, also go into the technical details, see technology as an element of the social world that you just want to understand in its context. So if you organize a workshop with stakeholders who all might somehow be affected by this technology or have an interest or whatever, a stake, this is what you do. Everyone should really understand what the technology can do, what they could do with it, how it could affect them. And then the most important element actually is this step 2, stage 2, the dialogue, where you first try to identify the actors that might be affected by the technology, who are at stake, and then the effects, or I would call that, of course, the mediations. Well, how will technology somehow affect these actors? And then third, maybe most important, which values are at stake there? What are the central values at stake when this technology would be introduced in society? So then you already see that you think in terms of a technology that enters into society and that starts to do something, and that there might be things that change. And as soon as we have those values, then, well, the key outcome or the key output, if you want to say it so technically, of the guidance ethics approach is that we want to come up with options for action, concrete options, not lists of principles or whatever. We have enough of them, and it's important that they are there. But for practices, we need more. We need concrete connections to what people do. So then there are 3 domains where we can formulate options for action. If we want to keep up those values, then we can try to understand how we can work on the technology, how we can redesign the technology. Can a different design of technology work better to take these values seriously? Yeah, so that's kind of a value-sensitive design approach, but not with the idea that you can just first identify values and then you insert them in the technology, but you can also try to understand how values are changing, how technologies affect the meaning of those values. So it introduces a kind of dynamics there. Now, second, then there's the environment in which the technology will function, the context of it, which can be laws, rules, regulations, also the material context in which a technology functions, which you can change in order to keep up the values. Maybe there are some conditions of other equipment that needs to be there in order for the technology to do something valuable. And third, there's the user. How can we equip the user? Empower the user to be somehow critical, to understand the technology in a good way. Empower the user also with education, communication, to make sure that the values that we find important are not only, as it were, sort of thrown over them from the technology, but that they are there as well. And of course, a key element of techno-anthropology. And of course, here you can also see that landscape idea of human technology world, the user technology environment, that all those three elements in the landscape are at stake, and they all offer elements where we can try to well, intervene. And so this is maybe really the step that someone like Karl Marx tried to make when he said that until now the philosophers have always tried to understand the world, but now it's time to change it. So not that this is a Marxist approach, but it is a way to connect philosophical analysis to practices and to well, societal engagement. So let me give you an example of what it can mean, and then move to the COVID app. And so, of course, the last year has seen a lot of discussions on artificial intelligence. You must have had the same in Denmark. Virtually any company, business, governmental organization, country, the EU has come up with a code for AI. And so that is a nice thing to conclude in relation to the guidance ethics approach. So what it typically comes down to is that people say, okay, that we need some guidelines, we need some principles to deal with AI. And in legislation, algorithms help doctors to reach a verdict. In policing, there are all kinds of forms of predictive policing, where you can already try to predict if some crime might take place in some part of town in the future or something. In education, learning analytics, ways to analyze the behavior of students in connection to their performance. In health, obviously, expert systems advising medical doctors about diagnostics, treatments. It's a lot of well, quite deep impact that AI has on humans, and that makes humans sometimes nervous, because sometimes it's really hard to understand how AI systems arrive at their conclusions. And yeah, how could you as a doctor still go against it? How could you as a doctor ignore the advice of an algorithm, for instance? Or what kind of demands does it put on how we educate doctors? So the idea of human control, so technology is overpowering us and we need to regain control, that's typically behind all the ethical frameworks. In AI ethics, I mean, there are a zillion frameworks, but they all somehow include these three elements. They call it the FAT principles: fairness, accountability, transparency. So there should be fairness. We do not want bias and discrimination as a result of the AI systems, which means that we should train the algorithms with data sets that are inclusive, that do not only focus on one specific target group. We want to keep up accountability. So we want to be able to take responsibility for decisions that we make based on AI systems. And we want to have some form of control, therefore. And transparency is important for that, which means that we need to understand how AI works, how the data sets, which data sets were used to train the systems, but also how the algorithms work, how the processing of the data functions. It's all about understanding how we can stay in charge, as it were. Principles. And so this could then indeed function as some kind of an external framework. And this could be used as some kind of an assessment tool. So if it's not fair, if we cannot be accountable, if there's no transparency, then we should not want this. Of course, you can also try to use this as values that you can embed in a technology. But then maybe we need to understand more deeply what AI is doing to us. And that's maybe also a very interesting exercise, where, of course, many people have come to the conclusion now that AI is really affecting the way in which we think, the way in which we understand the world. At UNESCO, this is basically what we have been doing, and maybe it's also nice to say a little bit about this. I also did it in the last time that we saw each other. I will expand it a little bit, because then I focus really on the UNESCO response to COVID. And well, by now, there's a lot of work been done within UNESCO on artificial intelligence. And so within UNESCO, I'm chairing the World Commission on the Ethics of Science and Technology. And with that commission, we have written a preliminary study on the ethics of AI. But I've also been involved as the vice chair of a ad hoc expert group to work on a recommendation on AI ethics. So a recommendation, that's really the UN lingo, but a recommendation is a normative instrument, as people call it, just like a declaration, but a declaration is not legally binding. It can still be very influential. The Human Rights Declaration is very influential, not legally binding. A recommendation has some degree of being binding, in the sense that member states have to explain how they took it into account in their policymaking and in the legislation. And for UNESCO, the framework is a bit broader. Of course, you can already see that the FET principles that we just saw focus a lot on the individual, on individual values, less so on collective values. At the global scale, of course, the story is much bigger. If we speak about AI ethics, there typically is a frame of this fight between the US and China, where also two value frameworks competing, basically a capitalistic and centralistic value framework, which also has a lot of implications. Your data are either owned by companies that try to lure you into more consumption, or your data are owned by the state that tries to control your behavior. And then, of course, the framework is also that the EU would offer this third way, another third way, ethical AI, human-centered AI, etc., and to include values. Well, of course, that's a beautiful framework that we want to include values, but well, from the UNESCO point of view, that needs to be a broader set of values than only the individual values in Western thinking, probably. The key insight is that AI affects the way we think, the way we understand the world around us. It changes the mind, as it were. To connect it back to ideas of mediation, I've shown this before, but for people who hear this for the first time, technologies also mediate how we understand the world, how we think. They've always done that. They've always influenced the mind. Writing has influenced how our memory functions, since, of course, our minds cannot memorize as much as we could before we could write things down. At the same time, this external memory that we now have in books is also a kind of memory, but a different kind of. The printing press changed how we understand the world because it was the basis for the scientific revolution, where suddenly knowledge got democratized, could leave the monasteries, could enter society. Well, in the same way, AI is about to change how we understand the world, how we think. It's a new step in the technical infrastructure for our thinking. And that's basically the intuition that we use in that ad hoc expert group for UNESCO. The slogan with which UNESCO once started was this: that since wars begin in the minds of men and women, it's in the minds of men and women that the defenses of peace must be constructed. The mind. So that's why UNESCO focuses on education, science, culture, communication was added to that. It is the mind that is at stake for UNESCO, and we need to take care of the mind. So in our study on AI, we also focused on exactly that. How will AI affect education? How will it affect scientific practices? How will it affect cultural diversity, cultural framework, communication? And so then it's suddenly about fake news and journalism and the ways in which algorithms are connected to how we understand the news. It's about cultural diversity, the impact of machine forms of translation for smaller languages. It's about scientific explanation when part of it is based on the work of algorithms. It's also about the role of education in a world where some jobs might be taken over by AI and where we might put new demands on students. And of course, beside that impact on the mind, we also try to take in a number of elements from which we call global ethics, gender aspects, for instance, the role of Africa in the world, which is a very central theme in everything that UNESCO is doing, the environment and sustainability, and the role of AI, of course, its impact on the climate, all the energy that the AI systems use, but also the ways in which AI can help us understand the climate system in a better way, and which it can contribute to sustainability, and also peace, decision making, understanding conflict, the role of technologies in conflict, and how it could maybe contribute to a more peaceful world. So, well, that recommendation is done now, at least the first stage. So the expert stage is over, and it now goes through the member states, and they will, of course, change the text entirely before it will be adopted, hopefully in November. But it's maybe a good example of, well, how guidance ethics frameworks could play a role. Because, of course, in such a study, you end up with principles and not with the FET principles. Of course, it will be broader. It will focus much more on, well, gender issues, sustainability issues, etc., inclusiveness. But the principles can only work when they are somehow connected to actual technologies and actual practices. And that's indeed where this phenomenological approach comes in. Phenomenologists want to make things real. It's about going back to the things themselves, as it were. It's not only about thinking about concepts, it's also about our actual experience of the everyday life world. And that's where also ethics needs to end up. And that's why guidance ethics could also play a role, probably, in also finding context-specific ways to deal with the principles that were formulated. And so the principles do not become redundant, but guidance ethics offers a way to, well, to deepen them, or to understand what they actually mean in a specific context, or how the meaning actually might also change through technology. Well, and to do that, I think it's important to understand this guidance ethics approach as a form of citizen ethics. So that's maybe a line that I would like to end my talk with now in the 8 minutes that I still have. I see. I hope you can still bear with me. It's a long talk. But I think it's good to end a bit with that, because it's also so deeply connected to what techno-anthropology aims to do. To understand human technology interaction, to understand the human being in a technological world. And citizen ethics is a label that I'm using increasingly to explain what, well, guidance ethics could contribute to society, where it's not only a nice new ethical theory or something. It is not. It's basically a way to connect ethics to society. And, well, just like we've seen citizen science, we are still seeing citizen science, fortunately, in the design lab in Twente, where I'm one of the directors. We also do a lot of citizen science at the moment. But in the same way, you could do citizen ethics. I mean, citizen science has as its intention to get science out of the ivory tower, with the idea that the academics are not in the world, but they observe the world from outside, and they pour their knowledge over society. That needs to be given up. And of course, we have done that at our universities for the past decades. It has been one of the key tasks, right? And so it was all about knowledge dissemination. But I mean, dissemination is still a bit ivory towerish. Of course, the tower becomes lower, but it's still about you spread your knowledge over society. You don't conceive science as part of society, and certainly you do not consider citizens to be part of scientific practice. And so maybe one step deeper would be valorization. That's how the Dutch have come to call it. Something like value creation with science, so contributing to society. So then you place yourself indeed in society, but still you bring something to society. There's nothing coming back. Citizen science does reverse the arrow. Citizen science enables people to contribute to scientific practice, with as a second order effect probably that it also empowers people. And so I think for good reasons in the medical field we've seen this maybe as one of the earliest fields where it came up. Where, of course, the old idea of the medical doctor was the same idea as the ivory tower. The doctor would tell you what you have, and you would just listen, you take your pills, and you're not going to argue with the doctor because the doctor is the expert, right? Well, in our times, we have become something like a critical patient, and we want to understand what the doctor says. And if we don't really get it, or we have some doubts, then we ask a second opinion. So it doesn't mean that we think science is just another opinion, and that we think it's only opinions. Of course not. It's still about science, but we understand that humans do science, and we want to understand how they do it. And so I think in health now, citizen science is becoming really big. So this is a picture of the new Technical Medical Center, well, the stairs in the Technical Medical Center of my university, where people do a lot of citizen science work at the moment, with the fascinating element that, of course, here citizens can do research on their own disease, where they are always the experts of their own disease. Of course, they have a unique source of knowledge that doctors can never have. They have the disease. And that gives them a unique way in getting engaged and involved in scientific practice. And of course, what we also hope is that it will, well, maybe add something valuable to the opposition that sometimes is arising between science and society, where we, of course, still have a lot of resistance against science from some people. And of course, we don't want to claim that we can take away that opposition. And of course, it's also good that there is a discussion. It also keeps science sharp. But the distrust in science probably is quite comparable with, well, some elements of what you could call populism in politics. Maybe being the result of people's experience of being excluded, not being part of it, that there is an elite of which they cannot be part, they can never be part, and the elite is just free to do whatever they want. They are powerless, they can't be heard. So citizen science, of course, reverses that. And so the answer that a citizen scientist would give to anti-vaccination movements would not be, okay, you're just too stupid to understand it, let me explain it once more and then slowly or something. But you would say, okay, come and join us. Let's explain to you why we think vaccines work and why they are not dangerous, and then give us your ideas. And so it's also an emancipation, you could say. Well, regarding the virus, we could also use that perspective of empowering people for ethics, and that's what we try to do with the COVID app that we have in the Netherlands, where we tried to do a two-track approach. We tried to have we did and we had an expert panel. So I'm in a task force of the Ministry of Health, advising the minister about the app, because what happened in the Netherlands, and that's what I told half a year ago, that's how it all started. The minister wanted an app fast, and he invited companies to make a proposal, and within 2 weeks he wanted to have the app running. And of course, well, then there was a lot of discomfort with people about privacy, about state control, about surveillance, etc. Because it was, I mean, the idea that the state would have control, would see where you are, how close you are to other people, that you might even need to show your app and use a red screen or a green screen showing whether you do or do not have the virus before you enter the supermarket or something. People felt this is a totalitarian state that we're entering. We're going to give up civil liberties that are very valuable for us. So we don't want that. Of course, I don't want that either. So I co-signed a letter to the minister with 60 professors or something from the Netherlands. The professors, the ivory tower was shouting. But then the answer was, okay, help us. Come and keep us sharp. So what we did was two ethical sessions. And I think all based partly implicitly on the idea that you could see that app as a mediator. I mean, this is of course not how we framed it, but this is what's really always been in the back of my mind, trying to understand what the app would do in society. So we didn't only want to formulate the principles to follow, but also evaluate what the app was doing. So here you could say at the individual level, of course, the app mediates interpersonal relations, helps us to interpret each other as potentially infectious or potentially vulnerable. It might invite people to take more risk, not to stick to the 1.5 meters because you feel safe, because you will get a warning anyway or something. Or it might contribute to more alienation or something. At a societal level, caregivers will have a different relation with patients through the app. And of course, at a political level, it interferes in the relation between states and citizens. Now, with the expert panel, we did the obvious thing. We formulated some conditions under which we thought it was a responsible decision to introduce the app in society. And that was typically built on the principles of liberal democracy. So it should be voluntary, it should also be effective, otherwise you should not do it. Privacy needs to be taken into account. There should be justice. So the negative effect should not only end up with one specific group, it should be equal, it should be inclusive. Everyone should be able to understand and to use it. There should be a good kind of procedure to arrive at it. Every voice needs to be heard when it's introduced in society. We should be able to take responsibility for it. And that there should be checks and balances, no improper use. Civil liberties need to be safeguarded. And of course, only when it's still necessary and the impact is proportional, then we can do that. Well, it's the obvious things in a sense, but we elaborate them quite extensively into a 20-page report. And so this was part of the decision-making process of the minister. But then when the minister said, yes, we're going to have the app, we thought, well, we should do more. We should have this citizen panel. And that's what we did with the guidance ethics approach. And well, I will not go into all the details, but it was really interesting to sit around the table with people who might experience the effects of the app. So meaning people working at the soccer stadium, people owning a restaurant, people checking your ticket in the train, people working at the food market on the square here, the central square in the city of Enschede. People just in practices, a general doctor, GP, a nurse, many people. And interestingly, and that's really a lesson that I learned that we can speak about more, the set of values from which they ended up thinking about the app was really different than the set of values from the experts, probably influenced by the public discourse and the voices in the media. The expert panel, of which I was also part, focused a lot on the individual, on privacy, voluntariness, we should stay autonomous and free. The citizen panel said, wait a minute, this app is so privacy sensitive that we basically cannot do what we want because it does not enable us to share our location, for instance. So it cannot be used by the health authorities to detect where there might be new hotspots where the virus is very active. It does not allow you to share your contact list. So you cannot have a quick way to inform all your friends and family members that you have the virus and that they should be careful. And it can also never store that those people were close to you. So you can also not send a targeted message. It's only anonymous codes that are stored, etc., in a very safe way. I think the privacy elements of the app are quite okay, impressively okay, I would say. But people felt limited in their freedom to donate their data. They did not only want data ownership, but they also wanted data donorship. And it also showed, I think, that we need to reach out much more to citizens when we do ethical reflections. Because, of course, it can use the work of ethical experts to formulate it and to connect it to ethical theories and to build solid lines of argumentation. But the total discrepancy between the two frameworks was really shocking for me, I think, and that there is such a big difference between these two approaches is, well, I found it very interesting and a good lesson to learn. Well, then to wrap it up, I think this is also maybe a lesson to learn for techno-anthropology, that human technology relations and normative reflection and also politics can come together. And of course, you are much better in this than we are in our master program, because I think of the stronger role of empirical work in the techno-anthropology program, but developing infrastructures for connecting our analysis actually to practices and also really empowering stakeholders in society to let their voices be heard is something very important, something that can also contribute to better, well, conceptualizations of technologies and their roles in societies and in human lives. That was it. Thank you.
Okay.
Screen sharing.
Great. Okay. So thank you very much. I will try then to take a few questions here from the audience here. So yeah. So if you want to ask a question or have a comment, then I kindly ask you to raise your hand. Okay, so I have a few. I will then start with a few comments and questions. And well, first of all, can you, when you were speaking about the app as a mediator, then I mean, you had these the human app, human caregiver app, patient, state app, citizen. I think these.
Yes.
So can you say a little bit then about because in the equation it's human technology world, and then in the first one it becomes human technology human. I mean, so a little bit about
Yes.
that, how you can play with with these with the human and the world entities.
Yeah, beautiful question. I mean, I think this is spot on. It's one of the weaknesses, I think, of the formula, and also of the perceptual focus of post-phenomenology, that you always think, oh, this human technology world, so that should be things. But of course, it could also be animals or nature or other human beings. So it's maybe too technical a term. And I think actually the interpersonal relations as mediated by technologies deserve special attention. I mean, I've, well, I think just a few weeks ago, I gave a talk about, well, video conferencing, telepresence on the screen. And of course, I mean, that is an interpersonal relation that is mediated by technologies. And that also affects, for instance, this interpersonal dimension of education. And so, well, according to educational theorists, there are some elements that every form of education has. It's not only qualification, where it's about the content of what you learn, but it's also about socialization, personalization, as people say. Bista, one of the theorists in that field. So how does the interpersonal relation that comes about in a mediated way through technology contribute to personalization and socialization? And so there are good ways in which we can do that, but it also requires extra concepts probably to do that in a deeper way. Maybe to add one line of thinking to that further, because I know that some people in Techno-Anthropology are interested in that too, is Lars especially, I think, is the connection to Merleau-Ponty's work on the chiasm. Where Merleau-Ponty tries to understand interpersonal relations as some kind of a, you could say, a form of being perceived and perceiving actively at the same time. There's a mutuality in that interaction, that we know that we do not only perceive, but we are perceived as well, and the other is also perceiving and is perceived as well. So there's not a line between human technology world, but it's a cross, it's a chi. That's why it's called the chiasm. And technologies can mediate the chiasm. If you wear a face mask, of course, this is a well, low-tech mediation of interpersonal relation, where the chiasm somehow well is well, distorted is maybe not the right word, but it is mediated so fundamentally that we really have to learn again what it means to be a physical being for each other. And the face masks also show our own vulnerability, or the potential effectuousness that we can have. That we can be a danger to others, and we can also be in danger well, from others. So in that way, if you bring in those extra concepts like the chiasm, it can help us to expand the idea of human technology world into a bit more sophisticated framework to understand what's at stake between human beings among each other.
Okay, great. Actually, in Copenhagen, we did discuss the chiasm actually, yes, because you mentioned it also last time. So yeah, so we are familiar, some of us, nice. with the chiasm.
I'm actually working on a paper with Bas de Boer, who also did some work with Lars on the chiasm and face masks. But then actually, maybe it's a bit exotic, but it's not only about this interpersonal relation, but also about our relation with the virus. Mm. I think one of the notions that Merleau-Ponty connects to the chiasm is a notion of the flesh. Maybe a weird word, but it's kind of the condition for a social relation is that we are made of something, of the same stuff that the people are made of who we perceive. That's why we understand what they are. They're also of flesh. But now we try to show also how the virus is also part of that flesh, and how our interaction with the virus also reveals our own flesh in a new way. And well, how it shows, because we have to somehow, you could say, protect ourselves from it, how we are vulnerable for the virus, but also how the virus is vulnerable for us, because of course we can obstruct it from circulating if we use the face mask. So it's kind of an extra dimension where indeed the chiasm goes back into the human technology world relation, not only to the human technology human relation. Sorry for the extra.
Yeah, great, thank you. So let me hear if there are more questions or comments here. Otherwise, I suggest that that we then take a small break, and in 10 minutes, and in the break you can think of a question or a comment. There are 2 new messages I can
Stefan
see.
Matthias, good.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Stefan, you have a question, and Matthias also. Okay. So Stefan, please.
Yes. Sorry, my name is David. I have a question on like applying post-phenomenology in like your analysis. Like I understand a lot of the pretext with the phenomenologists such as Heidegger and those kind of conceptions about being, but I have a hard time applying it to like all my data sets for my studies. Like, how do I expand the framework of those human-technology relations and actually produce some kind of product from those kinds of observations?
Yeah,
I have a hard time applying it and seeing how it should look like, I guess, out in the world, because of course we have all the text, but we need some more
guidance.
knowledge on the practicality of it.
Yeah, great question. Indeed, I think it is a challenge, because of course it is not an empirical methodology or something. It's more a philosophical approach. So it's a set of concepts that enable you to understand things. But of course, the concepts are about reality, are about the real world. So they would be worth nothing if you cannot also connect it to empirical work. I think the trick is to connect it very concretely to the practice that you are investigating. So if I go back, for instance, just to give you an example, to the work on the lemniscate that Olia Kudina did, then she did 2 things. So we did that analysis online that I explained about people's definition of privacy in relation to Google Glass. So that was empirical research where she just could, there was quite some work what she could derive at least 10 new definitions of privacy. So that's a big data set, so to say, all the YouTube comments. And of course, her interpretive work was really qualitative. A bit quantitative maybe, but mostly it was just organizing the arguments and seeing patterns, saying, hey, there are actually some categories of definitions. So that was from, you could say, qualitative empirical work. And another line that she explored was about a technology that is not there yet. So that's also maybe interesting for the people who want to ask a question about that later in this meeting. I think I've told about this before also when I lectured before in Copenhagen or in Aalborg, about this chip that the nanotechnologies are developing at the University of Twente to select the sex of your child, a chip that can sort sperm cells in X and Y chromosomes. And of course, it is not there yet. It functions already a little bit for animals, etc. But you cannot investigate what it's doing in society because people cannot use it yet. It's actually illegal even to use it. But still there, she developed a method, or at least she used an existing method, and she expanded that with post-phenomenology. And that is the IPA method. Maybe I told about it before, interpretive phenomenological analysis. So this is not only a good beer, but also a good empirical method, IPA. What she did was speak with people about their ideas about their offspring and parenting, parenthood, etc., and then introduce the idea of this chip and just continue the conversation, and then see how they implicitly started to redefine things, to redefine their own responsibilities, to redefine their own desires, and then try to see how concepts or values shifted in meaning because of the possibility of that technology. So it's also, and this was a lot of work. I think, she only did a few interviews, and it took her really weeks, a month maybe, to go through all the data. So of course that doesn't build on ideas of an embodiment relation, an authority relation. All those details are not so important. But the idea of mediation, that a value is mediated and that you can study empirically how did mediation takes place. For instance, by studying how people appropriate the technology, that can work. Maybe one last example, Bas de Boer, who I also mentioned, who also was a PhD student in the project on mediation theory, studied how scientific instruments are used in neuroscience. what he did was studying the appropriation empirically. So how do people make sense of the technology? How do they understand the role of MRI imaging in making visible, for instance, forms of autism? And that people would really say, hey, this is maybe why you can or cannot see that people are autistic on the basis of an MRI scan. And so then, well, you need to understand how they make sense of the images and also of the role of the technology in the producing of the images before the technology can help you understand the world.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just
so the empirical stuff is somewhere else maybe than in all the human technology world relations.
So just so I understand you correctly,
Yeah.
it's very much following like the kinds of discourses people use when they talk and use technologies, and the empirical work that lays together with the using post-phenomenology is just making those kinds of connections and actually explaining, I guess the technologies in practice by looking at discourse.
Yeah, well, and indeed, this is also really good that you ask this, because indeed, what I just said really focuses on that. And the reason for that is also that in the project that we did, we focused a lot on conversation analysis. So understanding how people speak. But of course, you can expand it really into more forms of ethnographic research, because it's also about how people deal with objects, with machines, with tools. I mean, if you study face masks, then I mean, you should not only study how people talk about face masks, right? Especially if it's about the chiasm with the virus. Viruses don't say that much. And so then, of course, there are other ways in which you can investigate what technologies are doing and how they play their mediating role. As long as there is an interaction between what you see empirically and how you can make sense of what you see with the help of these concepts, I think then it's okay. And ideally, also, if you do empirical philosophy, the ambition is not only to show that your concepts work in practice, but more that the practices that you study challenge your concepts, and that you might need better concepts, and that we need to add the chiasm in a new way, techno-chiasm, to understand face masks or something. That's even better. Then you really organize some kind of a level playing field where it's not only about the primacy of theory or of practice or the empirical stuff. It's really about organizing close interaction between them.
Okay, great. I have then so we have Matthias, and then I also Torben, our professor here at the Humanities and Techno-Anthropology. I also asked for him to give a short intervention on the comparing post-phenomenology and ANT that you mentioned, and then we finally have also a question from Jakob. So we have three interventions here. So Matthias, first you.
Yeah, hi there. My group and I, we're working with the 5G technology and the resistance against it. And we were thinking about how we can understand electromagnetic radiation as a technology in itself in a post-phenomenological kind of perspective. We were thinking that, we all use the radiation in the wireless communication devices and such all the time, but we're not interacting with the radiation itself, though we're exposed to it all the time. And some people claim to sense it or sense the radiation as disabling, and because they feel hypersensitive to it. Meanwhile, most of us don't notice it at all. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, beautiful. I just missed the very first sentence of what you said. So which types of radiation is it? Is it the 5G, or is it in general?
Mostly 5G, because we're working with the Danish movement against 5G technology.
Yeah, interesting.
But I guess it could be electromagnetic radiation in all its forms.
Super interesting that you do that, because I mean, this is also for me a very interesting example of that. Of the importance of citizen ethics. I mean, this is just like the vaccination debate and the climate denial. and there is a group of people who feels ignored or not taken seriously, yeah, this is one of the exemplary cases there. Yeah, I think, what should I say? Of course, if you want to study how these forms of radiation play a mediating role, then I think the only thing we can do here is try to study the perceived impacts of the radiation, right? So we can only study the traces of the radiation, because itself, it is not visible. And of course, there's a lot of research of people saying that there is no impact. And so that also makes it really complicated. And so if there is indeed no impact, then yeah, how could you study it? So for me, I think, yeah, I mean, so the question is, what is mediated? If we want to focus on mediation, and maybe the question is also, is mediation the most important line of thinking here? And so I think it would be interesting to see how people experience the role of technologies in their lives, and to understand what kind of empowerment they experience. And so is there really, in this human technology world relation, for instance, with the devices that they fear so much, is there a way for them to appropriate it? So can they enter into that landscape, and how? And so how do they make sense of the radiation, or of the technologies that somehow produce the radiation? What organizes their interpretations of the radiation? I think if you could understand that, if you could understand the infrastructure of their, well, mediated understanding of the radiation, then it could also, well, shed more light on how their views came into being. And of course, that can be used also to maybe add extra perspectives to give a more nuanced view, or it can help us to understand better why they are right and we are wrong. That's also possible, of course. But I think it can also be an occasion to empower people to understand these forms of radiation in a deeper way. Because I think ultimately, if I think from that ideal of citizen science and citizen ethics, it should be about including their perspectives. So if they experience impacts of the radiation, then, well, bringing that into the discussion and raising the question, can we indeed relate what you experience to radiation? How could we investigate that? How could you yourself be empowered to investigate that? How could you let your voice be heard? And then you include people in the discourse, and you don't say, okay, we have the facts and you are just a stupid citizen and you think that you are affected by radiation, but you just you don't understand it. And then you say it differently. You say, okay, join the community of people investigating this, and what's your perspective, and can we together do more research? And then it's maybe not so much about mediation and about post-phenomenology in that sense. Of course, you could still try to understand how technologies help to shape the interpretation. It's more about inclusiveness, which is also maybe an element of human technology world relations. It's empowering people to, well, engage in a relation with the technology, and yeah, to understand how you can deepen their engagement with the technology.
Hi, I'm Mille, but the technology itself, like as radiation, it's more like it's human, then it's radiation, then it's the device, and then it's the world. So it's like there's a perspective more than just human technology world, because it's, so we are a bit difficult to understand the relation and to understand the specific, because it's not just a background relation, because you can't really interact with it as a heater or as your freezer or whatever.
So
I think it's also like that we are a bit.
Okay. Now I see. Okay, so you're in doubt whether you need to study the interaction with the radiation or with the devices that produce the radiation somehow. And I think that is a good. Yeah, sorry. Did you want to?
Yeah, especially because the people that sense the radiation, they specifically don't want to interact with it, so they don't use any devices, but they feel as it goes through their body anyways. So therefore, it will be about the radiation itself.
Yes.
And we can't really relate to that or
Yeah.
put that into the relation categories that you guys have made.
Yeah. So indeed, I think if you want to study the interaction with the radiation, it's different than the interaction with the devices that produce the radiation.
Yeah.
And so, and if it's about their relation to the radiation, and then of course you can try to understand how the radiation mediates their interaction with the world, if you can. And so then it is about how does their perceived experience of radiation affect how they behave, how they do things. So what are the traces, as it were, of the impact of the radiation? And I mean that's even if it's not visible, that can still work. I mean, Latour wrote about the appearances of the Virgin Maria and how it affects people, which is of course also another very material thing, and also another thing that everyone believes in. But it works. So you can study traces, and then of course. There, the human technology world relations of non-ID could work, because you can have an alterity relation with the radiation. You can also have a background relation with it, or it can also mediate your understanding of the world. And so in that sense, even though it's not a material device, you can study how it is in the relation between humans and our world, how it mediates the relation between people experiencing the radiation and the world around them, which is mediated by that experience of radiation.
All right.
Okay, I think actually, I think we need to take a short break now, but I see in the chat there are several questions more, and we also have student presentations, things like that. So, I mean, we will go on until the very end, but we have quite a lot. But what we will do after the break then is to take the student presentation, and then we will take the question by on post-phenomenology and design. Then we will take Torben's comments on the relation between post-phenomenology and ANT, so that we also get this comparative element into the discussion. And then I will return to the questions made in the chat. So please continue to write your questions, and we will have to end this session. I don't know, quarter to one at least, but maybe even before, so that all can have lunch until we return to our other duties in the rest of the day. So let's take a break. I suggest like now it's 11:28, so a 12 minutes break. So we will return here at 11:40.
Good.
So see you soon. Okay, we see you.
What can you see actually?
We see your full presentation.
Okay, so
please go ahead. Please go ahead, but I know you have many slides, so keep it not too long, because we have a long list of.
Yes, of course. I know.
Yes,
actually, if you think that we are taking too much time, please put a little bit of pressure on us.
Okay, so please, the screen is yours.
First of all, thank you for the lesson, and we're going to present you our project very quickly, and also how we framed our project into the post-phenomenological, from a post-phenomenological point of view, so that you can have your opinion on that, and also maybe tell us something that will spark our interest. So the main, the technology that we are looking at is this software, which is called Mediating Pain app. This software is so-called software for digital pain drawing. I'm gonna show you some pictures so that you can understand a little bit better. And basically, it allows the patient to draw on a tablet, smartphone, or on a computer with the mouse, where he feels pain on a body chart. The body chart could be the one of a male, of an adult male, adult female, or that one of a child. And this software is made by a spin-off of the AAU. And let's say it incorporates already existing tools for assessing pain. For example, pain drawings is an already existing tool, but usually it's done on paper. And other things are the pain scales, like the one you can see on the right, on the image on the right. So moving on. Important thing to tell as well is that not only you can draw pain, but you can also select different kind of pain. Of course, it changes with the color and different painful sensations. Oh, of course, if there is something that's not really clear, please do interrupt me, ask me for further explanation, or maybe afterwards. From our literature review and also from our personal experience as well, we came to understand that pain is a really subjective phenomenon. This could be kind of intuitive, but then again, if you take a look at the literature, there are so many examples of this subjectivity of pain. And this also brought us to think that, and to understand, it's really difficult, I think, to understand for the patient, because it's difficult to understand why do I feel pain? Why am I in such a condition? And also for the doctor, because one kind of pain could mean like different diagnoses. And this also brings to our problem of communication. And if you take the point of view of Ludwig Wittgenstein of communication, thought and language is a mental picture. So basically we're exchanging mental pictures. So in order for the patient to communicate better with the health professional, being it a general practitioner or a physiotherapist, he or she must have a clear picture in their mind. We know by interviews and by research that this tool is used by researchers because it allows them to process a whole lot of data and to visualize this data in a really quick manner. But it's not used by health professionals. These were different reasons, such as, for example, the time consumption of using such a tool, and also the difficulty to introduce this tool into the clinic's workflow. From our literature review and our analysis, we do have a reason, though, to think that this tool could be helpful for the health professionals and for the patients as well. So our research problem is, how could the Navigate Pain app technology be implemented into the patient-health professional relation? More precisely, we do have a series of sub-questions, which is, how could this technology mediate between the two of them? What are the barriers that prevent this technology from being used by the health professionals? And how could these barriers be overcome? So we are also thinking about possibly giving solutions. Now to the take on post-phenomenology. Our main relation is the first one. So patient, NPA stands for Navigate Pain app, the technology, and the health professional. If we kind of explode this relation, we have the patient, technology pain, technology health professional. So this is how it works. Actually, it kind of resembles the one you were telling us before, which is telepresence. And it's a relation that actually is the first time that I hear. And I think it could be really fitting with this kind of splitting. Then if we split ulteriorly this relation, we can obtain two different relations, which is patient technology pain, health professional technology pain. Taking the first one we mentioned, we are seeing it as, we could see it as an alterity relation, meaning that the patient communicates with the app and the app communicates with the health professional. Though it's worth saying here, it's not really a pure alterity relation, because it's not like you don't have different communication between the patient and the health professional. If this happens during a consultation, while if the patient is at home and the health professional is at the clinic and they communicate exclusively through this technology, which is a topic actually kind of relevant to the time we are living right now. This could be seen as a pure alterity relation. The second relation could be seen as an embodiment relation, because the patient, through the technology, can visualize pain. Taking a look at the third one, we kind of framed it as an hermeneutic relation. Because the thing is, the health professional has the technology, has the software, and he reads the software. So he reads the data that the patient gave him or her. And he reads this thing and interprets his meaning, meaning that it gives a diagnosis. This is what interprets means in this scenario. Moving on to intentionality, we're thinking that if we want to make this technology useful for the patient as well, we must have a kind of shift in intentionality, because the original intention and the purpose is to gather data about the patient's pain. If we want to make it useful, we need to shift our mindset towards more of allow the patient to be more aware of what he or she is going through, what's happening to their body, in order to make them understand this strange phenomena that is pain. Speaking about multi-stability, we were seeing, this is basically the whole idea behind our project, because we do have a technology that already exists and is used in a certain way. If we take multi-stability as the concept as the idea that a technology could have multiple uses, what we're trying to do is actually propose an ulterior use. So a different stability. This is it for our project. Thank you a lot for your attention. Again, if there is something that is not clear, or maybe I was too quick on some slides, please let me know. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for keeping it precise to the point. So, Peter, Paul, over to you.
Yeah, super interesting work, actually. It's really nice to see how much you can do with that technology. I mean, just a few reflections. I'm not sure if I remember everything, not seeing the slides, but we will get there, I think.
I can share it maybe. If you want.
Yeah, or we do it later. But I would say, first of all, the ways in which this technology mediates, I think, is more important in terms of how it constitutes the relations between, for instance, patients and their pain, or patients and caregivers, then, well, if you could call it an embodiment or a hermeneutic or an alterity relation or whatsoever. Because in some cases, for instance, if you say that the I don't know, patient app pain is an embodiment relation, I'm not sure if that's the case, because I think the app lets you express or maybe understand even your pain, but it doesn't give you a sensation of pain, right? But that's all the nitty-gritty details of the post-phenomenological approach. I think that is not the most important part here. I would say the question is, how does it organize indeed people's experience of pain, and how does it organize the interaction with the caregivers? And your notion of telepresence I found really interesting, because then of course it is a notion. I mean, we've used it to analyze drones, for instance, where people use a control unit and then the drone operates on an environment somewhere. So there's two technologies involved, as it were. And here also people use the app, and then the outcome of that go to a healthcare professional, and the patient is there on a distance, as it were. So it's interesting to see what happens there. So on the one hand, there is a mediation, I think, of how you can give your information to the app. So what does the app enable you to do, and how does it already pre-structure what you can write down there? Because it is not neutral, of course. The interface is designed, and the interface mediates how somebody can express their pain, their sensations of pain. The scale of intensity or something is already quite a specific choice on how you do it. So, for instance, you could also choose on how much the pain affects you in specific activities in your everyday life or something. And it might also be a way to measure how serious the pain is. I don't know. And the other thing is how that message comes to the healthcare professional. So, of course, now it indicates where on the body there is a specific amount of pain, but it does not indicate yet maybe well, how the pain emerged and went away again. And so what people did or how they felt or what their other circumstances were, etc. So it really organizes how the caregiver can see the patient. And it somehow takes away also a lot of information and really focuses on this specific way of interpreting pain. So that's how I would see this, as a maybe fully hermeneutic mediation, where the expression of how you experience the pain and also the interpretation of how the pain is experienced is mediated by the technology. And then one layer further, if I would then go to that citizen ethics perspective or something, that could be an interesting thing to discuss, maybe not only in an ethical sense, but also just to involve patients in the development of this technology. And so how does it affect how they can express themselves? How does it affect their experience of their own pain? Does it help them to understand it? I mean, sometimes it can also really help to get insights in what, under what circumstances you experience more pain than other circumstances, etc. So the activity of filling out the details in the app mediates your relation with pain. But there can be things at stake, and then of course also how does it organize the relation with the caregiver? And yeah, what is at stake there? What are the key values that are important there? And are there other things that need to be taken into account than are taken into account at this moment, etc.? Just the first improvisation when I hear you. I'm not sure if I touched upon everything you wanted to ask. So if there are still things that you would like to discuss, please say it.
Okay, thank you a lot for your perspective. No, actually, this is what I'm not alone here. It's just the camera. It's a little bit. So I'm here also with my other group mates. And what we wanted to actually ask you is just have a look at our project and tell you what you think about it. So thank you for your point of view. One thing that I didn't say, and I think it would be interesting also to let you know, is that we already talked with a physiotherapist, and he brought up this interesting point, which is that the app makes the patient focus too much on the negative side of pain, and he doesn't think it's useful for the patient in order to for the tool to be a rehabilitation tool or maybe to help the patient. And this actually connects back to the idea of the change of intention behind the app, because so far the app focuses on gathering data. That's the main focus.
Yeah. So, but that means, I mean, that's much in line with what I wanted to say. Indeed. So the app, of course, the app organizes a relation between the person in pain and the caregiver, but and that's an important relation, because ultimately that's the relation that you also want to intervene in. But it also mediates the relation between the patient and the pain, and also how the pain and the caregiver. So the caregiver understands the pain, the patient experiences the pain, and the caregiver needs to deal with the patient in pain. So it's three relations that take shape. And what you now say is that indeed that app already pre-structures the experience of pain, and that can be, of course, in an empowering way, but also in a disempowering way, as it were. And so it frames the pain in a specific way, and it even invites you to express what you feel. But well, that's where the mediation comes in. If you have to draw on a picture with a color that indicates the intensity, then that's the medium, and that medium mediates. That medium will shape what you experience. Maybe a different medium could also give, therefore, a different way of approaching pain, and of course, then also for the healthcare professional to understand that pain, etc.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Thanks a lot.
Mattia, and thank you, Peter Paul, or Mattia, and Irena and Renata, and Peter Paul for these nice comments to the project. Then we move on to Sissel, Anna, Simon, and Morten. Yes. So you have a question that you have across doing your project.
Yes. So shortly, I'm Anna, and we are writing a project about chlamydia in Copenhagen because it's on a high level. It have been that for a long time, and a big part of the problem is that young people do not get tested enough. So we have a collaboration with the AIDS Foundation, who works within the area, and who is about to implement this new technology called on-point testing, which is a different way of testing for chlamydia based on the principle that we need to bring the test facility to the young people where they are, for example, schools or bars or stuff like that, instead of them having to actively search for the test. And then the test also gives an answer in 90 minutes, so just really short about the technology. So we were pretty inspired about the idea that technologies are moralizing, because we looked at the technology as they are kind of shaping how, or they are shaping young people's decision in a moral way. But the problem is that due to COVID-19, there has been a delay on the implementation, which means that we don't have like physical access to the technology.
Yeah.
So our first question is about like, how can we talk about, or can we even talk about technologies being moralizing, even though we don't have physical access? Like, can we talk about?
Wow. Great question. Yeah, I think you could, of course, try to anticipate its implications. I mean, of course, you don't have any empirical evidence then, but it can be quite plausible that it will work in specific ways. And maybe you could even do that empirically by, well, making a focus group and, well, asking people how they believe that the test would influence them or would affect them, or maybe would change their sexual practices or change their relation with their doctors or their friends, their parents, their friends, whatever. So and I think you could also just try to make an analysis yourself of all the relations that could be mediated by that test. And so and then it could be helpful to compare the current situation with the new situation. So now I think there is a total disconnection between the field of testing and well, your everyday environment in which you have your sexual relations and where you could get that disease, or at least that virus. I think, is it a virus or is it a bacteria? I don't know. In any case, yeah, okay. And then I think, let me see. The question is, I mean, if it's about moralization, then it sounds like that there might be a moral goal that we want to achieve by introducing the test, or a moral goal in the sense of affecting people's moral decisions. And of course, that could be interesting. Yeah, I mean, that could also make it contested somehow. I mean, I still recall, it's a bit different, but also related. Here in the Netherlands, we had 20 years ago, 25 years ago, a long time ago, a big campaign also for sexual diseases, sexually transmittable diseases, I think you would say in English, and for people to use condoms. Where the government would put posters everywhere on the streets and please use condoms. And then actually some of the conservative Christian parties really objected a lot, because they said the government should be neutral. It should not interfere in our personal value systems. And now what the government's doing is implicitly to promote a promiscuous sexual life, and they believe in monogamous relationships. So they said this is not okay. The government says it's totally fine if you have sex with many different partners as long as you use a condom. complicated discussion, because in a liberal democracy, of course, you don't want to give a positive value advice to people, and at the same time, you also don't want people to get ill. So I could imagine something like this also in connection to the chlamydia test. So how will it affect sexual practice? That's maybe one of the things that you could investigate in terms of mediations. Sexual practice, it could be, I mean, you could actually stimulate people to have more risky sexual relations because you can test it. And I mean, if there is a cheap and good therapy, and if it's all anonymous, you don't have to feel embarrassed, whatever, well, why not? And then, of course, the question is if that would be a bad thing. But I mean, that could be one form of impact. And the other is maybe that it could also, I don't know, I mean, offering the tests at school, for instance, could also have different mediating effects. I mean, the fact that you can test at school will cause people to speak about it. Will you let yourself get tested? Oh, I don't know. Why do you? Why don't you? It might increase awareness of the risk that you get chlamydia. And therefore, it might also really stimulate people to use a condom in order to prevent it rather than to get tested and to need to take antibiotics or whatever. I don't know how it works exactly, to get cured again. So yeah, I would say also without empirical research, you can try to investigate in which relations the test could interfere between well, students or children at school, how they speak among each other about sexuality, but also, of course, it could interfere in the sexual practices they're engaged in. It could interfere in the relations between children and their parents, or children and, well, yeah, etc. And then try to anticipate what it could do before you can actually empirically see what it in fact does.
Do you have a follow-up? More questions, Anna, Cecil,
Yeah.
Simon?
I was reading up on the values that matter framework. That was,
yes.
Yeah. And I think there might be like a parallel to the safe cigarette example that is mentioned in the text about this, how if you promote like more chlamydia testing, that you will also maybe promote unsafe sex.
Yeah.
Do you think you can make that kind of comparison?
Yeah, so I think that that values that matter paper is also really about value change. Yeah, so that could also, I mean, in this case, you could say that maybe how people define safe sex changes, because now it could also be safer to have sex without a condom because you can test and be cured again. And so, and that could then also have an effect on people's behavior. But I would say that that's different. That's not value change. And yeah, I think yeah, maybe that's yeah, but maybe that will be the most important distinction. So does the meaning of a value itself change? For instance, I don't know, the meaning of intimacy, or the meaning of yeah, how do you say? I mean, a sexual relation means something for people, and the meaning of that could be affected by making it easier to have a sexual relation with with several people at the same time. So the exclusiveness of a sexual relation maybe could be somehow affected by, well, given the possibility to do this testing quite rapidly. I don't know. I mean, but that's really something that you should study empirically, and yeah, I mean, if you go deep, then that would be, for instance, that IPA method that I spoke about. This is basically what Olya Kudina did to investigate that sperm selection technology, and here, yeah, I mean, you could also simply study it empirically, but then you have to know what you want to investigate. So if you get a way of studying people's sexual behavior, probably you will have to do that of course, on the basis of self-report, studying it over a longer period of time. Then you could indeed try to see if it changes sexual practices. Yeah, and then, sorry if I speak too long, but I would also say, but there's also a normative thing. So, I mean, you framed it as moralizing technologies. And then, of course, the question is there a moral dimension here? And mean, if normative frameworks change, then we could also make that a moral issue. And that's basically what the conservative Christian parties try to do in the Netherlands, saying, hey, if it will become normal to have promiscuous relationships, as they call it, then that's not what we want. So we should prevent that. That should not be normal. So then you actually try to moralize the moralization, as it were. And well, that might also be the case here. And so I would say, from a democratic point of view, if there has to be decision making in a society, it's good to put it on the table, to make this available for democratic debate. And so that there could be implications of this technology, and they could also involve people's moral ideas about sex. And yeah, if we believe that sexual education is something that the government should interfere in, then that's important. And that's a touchy thing. I mean, we believe that it is so, in the sense that we want to help people to have safe sex, not and also to be inclusive. So to teach, at least, I don't know, but I'm sure in Denmark it's the same as in the Netherlands. So you learn about homosexual relations, and that it's all the same. It's all about love and intimacy and enjoying yourself, and that there should not be a distinction. So I mean, there is state education about sex. It's unavoidable. And then the question is this in the realm that we find acceptable as part of state education or not? And that's probably where the sensitive part would be, if it would indeed invite for a different, for different sexual practices.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Sissel, Anna, Simon, and Morten. Then I asked Torben also to he's not a student, but he's a professor here, Techno-Anthropology. But he is the expert in ANC here, and to kind of visualize or make it some of the differences between the different analytical strategies. I asked him to also to intervene on the relation there. So Torben.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you very much, Peter Paul, for bringing us up to speed on post-phenomenology. I'm happy to bear the cross of representing action network theory, and I think the question that Tom sort of suggested that I ask was something about what are sort of the differences and similarities between the notions of ethics and politics that are developing in the ANC camp and in the post-phenomenology camp, and I'll just give you my quick sort of idea about what is going on, and then you can respond to that. So my sense is that at least in action network theory circles, there's been sort of a lot of increasing focus on what is sometimes called issue politics. So the idea that when we have ethical concerns or political issues, then it's very much about emerging new technologies and new phenomena. So that means that the way to approach these things is to reinvestigate who are we, what is in the world, including our technologies, and how can we figure out ways to live together or reconcile that, or to manage our conflicts. So for that reason, there's been sort of a lot of theorizing and experimentation along those lines with workshop formats and ways to articulate issues and the relevant publics and bring them together. And to me, that this sounds very much like sort of at least the same genre of work as the guidance ethics. And to me, it also sounds like here in STS broadly, we are sort of sharing an increasing commitment to the idea that we constantly need to reinvestigate what is going on and develop our bearings on the fly, so to speak, our ethical bearings, our political bearings. So I think perhaps to put it provocatively, I could ask, is STS becoming sort of a philosophy of ad hoc workshops as opposed to sort of broader, more enduring moral principles, yeah. So that's one way to put the question. I'll just hand it over to you. And
nice, great question.
Yeah.
Great question. Yeah. So maybe I should answer first by exploring a bit the connections and also the differences between ANT and post-phenomenology, and then go into well, what it could bring normatively. And is it still about the big story, or is it only about workshops? Which is a very nice way of framing it, I think. Yeah, so I mean, I think ANT and post-phenomenology are close, but also different. Actually, Bas de Boer and I, and also with Hedwig de Molde, we just have an article accepted in the Social Studies of Science, which is all about how, from a post-phenomenological perspective, you can conceptualize science, and from an ANT perspective. So when we go back to the early work of Latour, and I think the main thing that we say there, and that's also what I would say in general, is that the difference is in the hermeneutic approach, I think, in post-phenomenology, as opposed to the semiotic approach in actor network theory. And I mean, both are about meaning. Science means something in semiotics, and in hermeneutics, it's about interpretations, which is all about meaning as well. But I think the difference is that in a semiotic perspective, you study the interaction between the signs. And of course, in Latour's material semiotics, the signs can also just be objects that play a role in interaction with other objects, and you get interobjectivity, etc. And I think in post-phenomenology, hermeneutics still builds a bit more on an asymmetry. And so for Latour, there is a symmetry. There's just interacting entities. And of course, there might be differences between the entities, but you don't need an a priori distinction between humans and non-humans, or subjects and objects. It's just interacting entities, like a network of signs, where the signs get their meaning from their interaction with the other signs. In post-phenomenology, there is an experiencing person in an experienced world. And of course, that is also not something that the phenomenologists would want to separate, but they want to distinguish them. So you cannot have the one without the other. It doesn't even make sense to speak about the world without us, for whom that world is there. So it's all about, well, forms of relations, but there is somebody, well, but yeah, I mean, there is a distinction between the entities that have the relation. And I mean, I still recall quite well, it also ended up in my book, What Things Do. But when I was a PhD student a long time ago, I ended up sitting next to Latour for a dinner. And we spoke about this. And basically he said, yeah, in post-phenomenology, you only have these very short networks. It's like human technology world. It's 3 entities. It's nothing. He said, I mean, I can have hundreds. And so that's and well, that gave me the idea that actually, of course, all these, I mean, all of these 3 in the human technology world relations can also be elements in longer networks, but it's simply a different way of approaching. Now, a long story to say that I think in the end, Latour can also explain, of course, the role of scientific instruments in scientific practice, just like you could do that with post-phenomenology. But I think in post-phenomenology, the focus would be much more on, well, the interpretive frameworks that come about when people make sense of the world as mediated through a technology, and that you can really study also the dynamics of that interaction. And so how people appropriate the technology, how that helps to read the world and recontextualize the technology, etc. For Latour, that would already be too much. He doesn't want that pre-given framework. He just wants to follow the actors and see what happens. And so maybe he would say, well, this is one of the many things that you could see if you follow the actors. If you follow the instruments, oh yeah, now you see this interpretive dynamics. And so I think we bring a bit more theory in, and we look a bit more explicitly already through a lens. But in the end, it boils down to a very similar thing, which is thinking radically from the interrelations between entities. So a fully relational perspective in which there are no pre-given essences or pre-given identities, but everything comes into being in a flux of relations. That's yeah, so it's close but slightly different, coming from a different tradition. And what's also interesting is that both the lines went ethical and went political. And of course, the work of Bruno is now really much focused on the climate and on the earth, etc. And in post-phenomenology, we have not seen that yet. And we were much later also with the political turn, I think. But I'm happy that many people have made that turn. But I think there, well, maybe it's a nice way to show the difference. So I think from active network theory, politics, that builds a lot on Dewey, dienpolitiek. So the whole idea is that there is an issue for people. Politics is about a double representation. And the people need to be represented, but also the world needs to be represented. There is something at stake for them, and the matters of fact, the matters of concern. And what you could do with mediation theory or with post-phenomenology is study how the issue formation and the public formation is mediated by technologies. So if Latour would say that in order to speak about the climate, we need to understand that both the people and the climate need to be represented in that discussion, then we could say, okay, I have a PhD student working on Extinction Rebellion, focusing on the question, okay, how does Extinction Rebellion organize itself as a group? How does it become a new parliament, as it were? And how do digital technologies play a role in how they gather? So how the public takes shape? And also the issue, how do they understand the climate problem? How do technologies mediate how the climate problem is put on the agenda for them? And then actually you bring in a mediation perspective into an actor network approach or a Deweyan approach to understand the infrastructure of politics. Oh, yeah, and then the question was, do we end up doing workshops or do we still do philosophy? Yeah, I think
basically workshops.
Definitely. Well, I think both approaches try to get in touch with the concrete details of the world, right? It's engagement with the details. And that's also the anthropological basis, I think, that they have it. So philosophical anthropology, cultural anthropology, they play a big role in both of the approaches. And I think for Latour, even it is an explicit ambition not to have a big theory. I mean, he even wrote that funny article about actor network theory, in which he wanted to withdraw the word actor, the word network, the word theory, and the dash between actor and network. Because I don't want to bring a theory. I don't want to bring you something, some lens through which you look at the world. I just want you to look at the world. And that, yeah, of course, you can say many things about that. Post-phenomenology brings a little bit more, but also not much more. But I do believe that in the end, both actor network theory and post-phenomenology are deeply, well, metaphysical positions. Latour also ended up writing about modes of existence, well, a very metaphysical stuff. Well, empirical metaphysics, as it were, a totally odd idea, of course, but beautiful, inspiring, super complicated work about how we can then understand the basic qualities of the world. Can you do that if you think like that? And I think that's what post-phenomenology also tries to do. So thinking from the whole idea of relationality, what are things then, and how should we then deal with the subject-object distinction if we cannot really do away with the separation, with the distinction, but we also don't want to separate them. How to think about that? And so the struggle with modernity, the subject-object distinction, and how to overcome it. That's maybe a very super abstract theme that both approaches also have in common.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, and thank you, Torben. Then let me just explain the list now. I think we will now take Elise, David, and Christos. Then we have Kaliroy and Rika. And they are more related, project-related presentations. And then we have some questions that was generated by a discussion by Jakob and Baptiste. So that's it. And I don't expect us to have time for more. It's just to give you an idea of where we are. Yeah. Okay. So Elise, David, and Christos, please.
Yeah. Hi, and thank you so much for everything so far. And how much time do we have? How fast should we be?
Tom, how much time?
I mean, we are like and we have to end around in around 20 minutes, and you can see we have like 1, 2, 3 presentations, and then two questions. So I think maybe 7 minutes, yeah, in total. So
okay. So we will be fast, and we will just quickly introduce what we are working with now, and then I think we would like to get maybe just like some guidance or like
I will try.
your feedback.
I will try.
I'll share my screen. And guys, do you want to say something, Christos, David? Are you there?
Yes, we're here.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Does any of you want to start saying something?
I guess we can just say how, like, we looked into this sound technology and the phenomena of sound psychoacoustics, and then there's a problem area that our world is filled with sound pollution, and
yeah,
that's just the lead into problem area, pretty much.
Yeah, because it all of this overload of information is creating stress and anxiety and stuff. So there's this whole new market emerging of this well-being movements, trying to be mindful, doing all these things, and we're trying to level up our own performances. And we found this technological solution. It's called Endel, and it's trying to create this tech-aided bodily function that is going to help us perform better as human beings. Yeah, by creating a visual soundscape that is supposed to, to help you to either focus on your work or to find calm or to fall asleep and get the proper amount of sleep. And it's based on user input. So the generative process of this soundscape is becoming a translation between different languages, you can say it like that. But it still is like, even though the user is shaping the soundscape, it still is happening on the premise of the technology. And
the rhetorical triangle.
Wow.
This is like, we started to look at it, how the technology is can be put in a socio-technical configuration, and started talking about how are the different how are the relationships between the producers, the interface, and the individual user. And we want to we want to look into how the technology affects the human experience, and how it changes our perception of our life worlds when we are being mediated to this extent by a technology. Wow. And how, like, we have been talking about now to look at how Ida is talking about the phenomenology of sound, and then we want to look at the multi-stability of the technology, because it's also interesting, because they are providing a lot of stabilities, if you can say it like that. Yeah. And we want to see how are the users actually using it, because there is some indications at this point that maybe people are not even using all of the stabilities. So it's the user that creates the dominant stability, which is a little bit interesting. And then we also want to look at the intentionality of the technology. And while you were presenting today, we were kind of thinking that it seems that this technology is really presenting itself with a lot of the considerations that you talked about when you were talking about, again, ethical framework for creating technology, because they have like they keep referring to philosophers and scientific concepts in order to position themselves in the world. So they're yeah, and this is now I will stop sharing the screen. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, nice. Wow. Super interesting work, actually. I'm just not sure if I entirely grasp what the technology is doing. So does it generate soundscapes itself to make you calmer, or does it give a visual depiction of sounds that are there in your environment?
Yeah, no, it generates sound. So it's using a sound masking technique to generate a soundscape based on inputs from the user, which can be you can choose how much you want to share, but it's based on your activity level and the time of day. So the soundscape is generated according to the circadian rhythm. And
wow.
So it's
nice. Now, I mean, there are many things in which I think a mediation approach could help there. I mean, one of the dimensions that comes to my mind is a dimension of engagement. I mean, it seems to outsource a little bit your mindfulness, right? So it automatizes the kind of input that your brain would need to stay focused, right? So if you look at that from the perspective of somebody like Albert Borkman, you would say, okay, it almost makes well-being or harmony or focus a commodity, and that can just be reached with the push of a button. You reprogram your brain and you hear the sounds, or you watch the soundscape, and then you're all ready for optimal performance. So I mean, that might be at odds with the ideas of mindfulness, which really require you to be present in your environment and actually not to want to optimize yourself, but more to dissolve yourself or something. So it's interesting to see how it mediates the engagement that people have with their own well-being and with their environment, and to what extent that engagement is in line with how you could see well-being. Some extra sound. And then, of course, it's also interesting to see how it mediates your own understanding of your own well-being. So apparently the app reacts to you. So in what it gives you, it also gives you insight in apparently how you are doing, or what your health condition is, or what your state of mind is, or whatever. So that interpretive relation that it mediates as not only your active engagement with yourself, but also how you understand yourself, how you understand well-being, or that's also an interesting dimension.
They build into the technology, like they use this as, like they mention it very fast when they present their product or their service, that they try to create a technology with a minimal amount of mediation. So the technology will sort of pick up on all these external and internal informations, and allow you to not think too consciously about all of these things, but it will just be like a carpet or like a rock that sort of so, and also does not give you feedback, will only tell you in this week you had this much time.
No, but what I mean to say is that in doing so, it does give you implicit feedback, right? So it is a reaction on you.
Yes.
What it gives to you is quite specifically tailored to you. And in doing so, it affects not only how you deal with your environment and how you deal with your mindfulness and your being focused or whatever, but also implicitly shapes how you understand yourself, how you get an idea of how well you are doing or something. So it's interesting maybe to see it also as a hermeneutic device, or a device for self-understanding. So maybe that's the thing. So it's a self-relation that takes shape through understanding yourself, and also through engaging with yourself in a specific way, maybe inviting for disengagement or new forms of engagement. And of course, it also mediates your relation with the world, the way in which you are present in your environment. And then maybe the normative line is indeed, is it about self-optimization and about performing better, etc., or not? Is it about some other values, and how are these values in line with the intentions behind the technology?
They also emphasize, like they use a word like democratization of wellness, and also of AI. Like they feel that their technology is actually giving people, like on an individual level, a chance to sort of be almost like a warrior in the way of inscribing like good and positive how do you say, like perceptions of technology, and how technology can be in the world and in our lives.
Yeah.
Okay, Peter Paul. So you so you answer, and then we will go on to Kali-Roy. Yeah.
Maybe just in one sentence, I think that idea of democratization is interesting, because it could also be a very neoliberal idea of what a democracy is. Then for some reason, democracy is how much you can get out of yourself, how you can optimize your performance. If that is democracy, then it's quite a different idea of democracy than some other people could have, where it's much more about being a community. So neoliberal optimization of your performance, make the best of your life. That seems to be implicitly, if I understand you correctly, what is behind this. And well, there are other ideas of democracy as well. So that could be interesting to see also. What kind of democracy is inscribed in this technology?
Great.
Good luck.
Thanks,
Nice
Elise,
work, Elise.
David,
Thanks.
and Christos, and thanks, Peter Paul, for these useful comments. So, Kali-Roy, so let's hear a little bit about your project and your concern.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, actually. And thank you very much for this lecture. And I'm really glad that it was online and I could participate, since I live in England. So what I'm doing for this semester is I'm doing an ethnographical study about the COVID-19 app. So your lecture was really relevant to what I've been searching. And the interesting thing about England is that they have implemented 2 versions of the COVID-19 app. So and I'm sorry, I haven't prepared the presentation. I just thought that I should share, and to get your feedback, because
fine. No worries.
So my problem statement is right now, what different technologies for halting the spread of COVID-19 have been implemented in England, and how do different technologies rely on and change relations of trust in England? Because I'm making an online research in Twitter, in some forums about what are people's views about this app, and about this the fact that the 2 apps have been implemented. And the interesting part of it is that the first app, the government focused very much on the technology, trying not to cooperate with Google and Apple, this exposure notification system. Yep. And so they tried to implement it in another way, by hiring many companies. But this had some, so they implemented the app, and then they tested it in a region in England, to see if it works, and all the errors that could happen or anything. So the feedback was that there were some errors because of the technology, because of the Bluetooth system, because they were not using infrastructure that Apple and Google offers. So they had to shift. And it was really interesting that when they made this shift from the first system to the second, people were very concerned about privacy, and they didn't trust. They said that I don't want to share my data with Apple and Google. But at the same time, people are sharing everything through other apps, and maybe don't even realize it's So this semester I'm just gathering data because it's an ethnographic. I have to do a lot of ethnographic research online and through interviews. But from your lecture, I think that it's really relevant, and I think that the mediation is it is a background mediation, but also it's an alterity relation, as I'm thinking. And of course, the citizen ethics it's a really important thing here, because the health minister concluded recently that before releasing the app, we should have engaged people to the app and educated people. So that's
interesting. Well, I mean, I think many lessons can be learned from this app. So as I said, I'm still deeply engaged actually with the Dutch app, and I think what happened in the UK is indeed really interesting, because it shows our dependency on Apple and Google, and what will be interesting to see is how the app itself has maybe mediated people's ideas of privacy. And so here in the Netherlands, all focus went to the ways in which the contact data were stored. And they developed a technique, and that technique is used in many other countries now also, that they store anonymous codes on your phone that were generated by the other phone, and will only be stored after 15 minutes being closer than 1.5 meters. But you don't know who it is. And every night you synchronize with the central server, and you get the codes of people who have reported that they were affected, and then it compares it on your phone. And so everything is local on your phone, and then you get a notification if one of the codes matches with one of the codes on your phone. But of course, below the surface, it's still based on the operating systems by Apple and Google. And the government doesn't know who you are, but Apple and Google do know who you are, and they do know with whom you have been in contact. There's no way to avoid that. I think, if I'm honest, informed correctly, in the UK, in the end, they accepted that, and they just went all the way for the system of Apple and Google. And here, I think people were very happy that we have a safe way of storing the data. And in the end, the privacy activists still said, yeah, of course, but Apple and Google still know it. Well, I think they have made them sign agreements that they would not enter into those data. But the interesting thing is also that in Dutch public debates, for instance, every week we get reports about how well people comply with the measures and if they work from home or not, etc. And the government uses data from Google Maps, which shows how much people commute. And so it's also totally odd. So on the one hand, we are totally afraid of them, and on the other hand, we use them. So our notion of privacy, I would say, is mediated, and that would be a very interesting ethnographic thing for me. And I mean, it's an idea that comes to me now. But if you want to study moral mediation, how does our idea of privacy take shape through the COVID-19 crisis? And so how does the app shape a specific notion of privacy, but also how does the news and the commute data interfere in what we see as private information or public information? Might be nice.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Rika, you also have sent me an email. So if you can intervene, not too long. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi. Thanks for this opportunity. I have my toddler here, so if there are extra noises, it's just she being a baby. I try to be quick. But I just wanted to hear your thoughts about my project. So this is a bit heavy topic of domestic violence. And during pandemic, it was, of course, reported that it really escalated. So I'm doing a semester project on technology that is developed to support victims of domestic violence. I'm looking, for example, a GPS tracker bracelet for the perpetrators that France is going to have a trial on. So if the perpetrator goes too close to his victim, the woman and the police is alerted. and activists are against them, saying that they are useless because they won't stop the perpetrator attacking if he wants to. But my question is that could this be more about the technology's potentiality to change attitudes because of its mediating nature? So GPS tracker would help to make domestic violence, so the fact that it is a huge societal problem, and but still it's a taboo subject. So it would help it to make more visible and more talked about. And even if the bracelet is something that could stay hidden under the clothes, the perpetrator would feel it. So the bracelet might help to co-shape humans and the world. Yeah. And then I'm also looking at panic buttons. So these are like help alerting devices or apps on the phone. And for example, in Turkey, this kind of app fighting the violence towards women has been downloaded over 327,000 times. And this is criticized for the fact that the help doesn't necessarily come any faster than if you are calling help. But again, I feel that it helps to break the silence. So the panic button could be like a mediator in a sense that if a victim, for example, downloads the app, she must already become more aware of her situation and the danger that she might be in. So it can also act as an extension of herself. So sometimes it can be just easier to press a button than make a call and talk about your situation.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, I think everything that you say is about mediation. So technologies that might present themselves as just a nice tool. So you get a warning if the perpetrator is close, or you have a panic button and you can inform people if there's something wrong. It is always more than a tool. So the panic button organizes how safe and secure you feel. I mean, it could also have negative consequences, but at least it helps you to be aware. It helps other people to be aware, especially if the panic button is visible, that other people can see that you're in principle using that technology. And the same thing, I think, for getting these automatic notifications if a perpetrator is too close. That of course you can say, well, that's a form of surveillance that we would not want, but at the same time, of course, then you could say, well, if these people are so dangerous, then why are they not in jail or somehow locked up? And if that is not the case, then it could indeed create a situation of constant awareness also for the perpetrator, and I think that would also require that you have some understanding of the psychology of the perpetrator. So what circumstances result in abuse, and can an early warning system maybe already take out the spark that might set everything into fire, and then it might actually be, or does the notification I mean, is the notification that spark? If the perpetrator comes close and then the GPS signal goes off and that makes him even more aggressive, I mean, that will be horrible. So all those mediations, I think, should be investigated beyond the functional roles of that. And that's, yeah, then again, I would start with identifying in which relations these this technology could interfere, or these technologies could interfere. And so the panic button, which relations does it help to shape between the potential victim and who, and the perpetrator and family members and relatives, and also the GPS system, what kind of relations. And also, I think the self-relations are important here. What does it do to your self-understanding as a victim or as a perpetrator if those technologies are there?
Okay, great. Time is now 12:46, and I know that many of you have a class at 1 o'clock. So we still have some questions to your talk, Peter Paul, but we take the round. We have Jakob, Baptiste, and Peter, but do it very quick, and then we take these 3 questions, and then you answer also briefly, and then we adjourn for today.
Good. And that are the questions in the chat, or?
No, not all of them.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
We hear you.
Well, just be a quick question then. In your guidance to ethics, you speak about that we have to view ethics as a more practical way than not in these imaginary ways of using technology. But I really like this way, but the things I'm often confronted with when speaking with other people is that this is a naive approach to ethics when we're not discussing these like doomsday dilemmas. What is your response to that? Because I feel it's hard not
Yeah.
seeing a naive approach.
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I say that these doom scenarios are really important, but more as signals than as potential realities. Because the only answer to a doom scenario could be, oh, this is what we do not want. And then you end up living in a world where these technologies are there. So then you're stuck, right? So my answer is always accept the technical condition of humankind. We have always been technological. There is no other way. And the ethical question is not about should we or should we not have these technologies, but the ethical question is about what kind of technology and how can we connect ourselves to these technologies. And then the doom scenarios bring key values. I mean, it's a doom scenario because there's something at stake for us. And then the next step would be, okay, if that is so important for us, how can we keep it up in our technological world rather than only being afraid that we will lose it all? Then it empowers you rather than disempowering you.
Okay, great.
Short
Then Baptiste, you had a question also regarding freedom, I think.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I had two questions. The first one is about your interpretation regarding the print revolution, and I think that there is a work of Elizabeth Eisenstein about it, which can be interesting to put link between ANT, post-phenomenology, and critical theories. So Elizabeth Eisenstein is saying that the print has been amplifying the Protestant shift. And I really like, I really find this concept of amplification interesting because I think that we can put links with mediation and also with something that I think this is lacking in post-phenomenology, but also with global perspective and also with negotiation. For instance, Dominique Boulier, which is a French sociologist of digital tools, is using this concept, saying that currently the digital tools are amplifying the pre-existential, psychological, and social basis, and is saying that, but today, when you are looking on the field empirically, you will find that this is mostly also, when you talk about it globally, amplifying the managerial way of thinking. And I'm come from the healthcare. At the beginning, I was not interested with this topic of digital tool, and I'm discovering post-phenomenology this year. And I think that if we use just the concept of mediation instead of the one of amplification, we are missing the fact that there is a global frame, which is the commodification of healthcare. And this commodification of healthcare will have a lot of different realities and multi-stabilities in the fact on the field, but there is this global. And I would like to know.
Okay, I think I need to stop you now, Baptiste. Peter Paul, can you comment on this amplification question?
Yeah, nice. No, so I totally share the observation, and I'm not an expert in the printing press at all. I just wanted to state that it affects our thinking, but there are many people who have theorized that, and indeed, amplification is also a concept within post-phenomenology, right? The earlier work of Don Eide, mediation always had a structure of amplification and reduction. And so in that sense, it is part of how you could see a mediation. Some aspects of reality get amplified, others get reduced. And I think for you, it's now a bit more on the social level that these amplifications and reductions take place. If you link it to the commodification of healthcare, I would say that the mediation perspective can give you an insight in the infrastructure of how that commodification works, how specific human technology world relations take shape through new technology, which results in the commodification. So you can do the mediation analysis at several levels, the micro level of the individual, the social level of a practice like healthcare, and then the political level, I think. the state and the citizen. So that can help, that you can see it as something that you can scale.
Okay. Great, thanks. Okay, Peter, the last question is for you, so please make it quick and the reply even more quick.
Alrighty. Well, I wrote it in the chat, but I'll articulate it. When speaking of a political turn, citizen ethics and options for actions, what is then the driving force of judgment? I've understood post-phenomenology as being articulated as non-foundational. So how does this leave the normative dimension of ethics?
Yeah, cool. Great question. I mean, this is the question that's always asked also to echo-network theory, and also to, I mean, the early postmodernists like Richard Rorty, etc., saying, how can you do something ethical if you say there is no foundation and we can do anything? So basically it's a form of relativism. So I don't think it is a form of relativism, but I also believe that post-phenomenology is not a normative theory in itself. I mean, there is maybe this hidden normativity in it, and that is, I think that it believes that it's important to empower people to understand all these mediated relations in which we are embedded. Yeah, so there's kind of an ideal of emancipation, maybe empowerment, to make mediations available, and yeah, therefore not to let people just be the victims of the mediations, but also to become actively engaged in that. But typically we need extra values to do the evaluation, and that's why I also came up with that guidance ethics approach, because sometimes it can help to bring the values in from ethical theory and they can be convincing, people can like it. But sometimes you can also use an infrastructure to articulate the values from within, and that's what guidance ethics wants to do, to empower people to articulate value frameworks and to then lay a foundation to systemize that somehow. So it is a way of bypassing a pre-given set of values and making sure that the values are also connected to the people. And that, then to conclude, is really what I learned from the Corona app. That even there you could see that citizens had different value frameworks than the experts. And well, that could be the ultimate alienation. If we develop an app from the idea that we now really do what people find important, but in practice they find something completely different important, then well, that shows that we can need techniques to get in touch with the value frameworks that are alive in society.
But I'm curious.
Great, Peter.
Sorry.
We need to stop now. It's 5 minutes to 1, and I know you have classes, so I need to. You need to freshen your mind before that. So then I would like to thank you again, Peter Paul, from this very nice day, and I recorded it. I hope it will not be ruined, so we have it so we can also enjoy the presentation and the discussions later by looking at that video. So to everyone, thank you very much for joining, and thank you for preparing. It was indeed a very fruitful and interesting morning. So thank you all for joining.
See you later.